The hum of the engines cut through the ship's hull like a living thing. Captain Mira Sato's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, her eyes fixed on the pale blue light of the navigation panel. The sterile hum of the command deck only amplified the chaos in her mind. A tense quiet filled the space around her, a silence that could have been mistaken for peace if it weren't for the pulsating red warnings across her screen. 10 minutes. A voice crackled from the communications panel, Lieutenant Harrow's voice, distant but still clear. They're coming. We won't make it to the gates in time. Mira gritted her teeth, a sharp, angry bite that did nothing to stem the rising tide of fear. Her fingers twitched, an involuntary response to the fear she refused to let show. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the others, her crew, preparing for impact. Engineers were frantically rerouting power to shields, while gunners stood by, their hands poised over buttons they hoped would never need to be pressed. Mira's mind raced through their options. Escape? Impossible. The hegemony fleet was too close, its lead ships on a direct intercept course. Negotiation? A laughable thought. They would never listen to a race they deemed beneath them. And surrender? She bit back the idea before it could take root. Mira was no coward. The world outside the ship's reinforced glass windows, what little of it was visible, was a swirling mass of stars. The bright pulse of the exogate was just on the edge of their reach. If they could make it there, they'd be safe. But 10 minutes. A brutal deadline. And her ship, the Resilient, was running on borrowed time. The heat in the engine core had spiked just a few hours earlier. The reactor was on the brink of collapse, and every second stretched out like an eternity. Her hand went to the holster at her hip. The weight of the blaster felt reassuring. She wasn't one to shy away from confrontation, but this was different. The universe was watching. The last hope of the scattered colonies was pinned on her ability to outmaneuver the enemy. It wasn't just the hegemony fleet they had to worry about. It was the lives of billions. Captain, shields are holding, but not for long. Harrow's voice filtered through the static. I know, Mira muttered under her breath. I know. Her eyes flickered across the command console, calculating the odds. She had to act. Now. A voice in her ear, low and familiar, interrupted her thoughts. It was Commander Kale, her second in command. We can still break through, Mira. It's risky, but I've seen you do the impossible before. She didn't have time to respond. The screen ahead flickered, then cleared, revealing the massive, sleek vessels of the hegemony fleet, their long, sharp forms silhouetted against the backdrop of distant nebulae. Their weapons glowed with threatening anticipation. They've locked onto us, Harrow said, his voice tense. We're their target. Not for long, Mira replied, her voice firm with resolve. She slammed her fist onto the console, her command issued with a cold fire. Kale, divert all power to the forward engines. Take us through the asteroid field. We'll use it as cover. You're insane, Harrow barked, disbelief in his tone. It's our only shot. Mira's eyes locked with Kale's. They didn't need words, he already knew the plan. The Resilient wasn't built for close combat. It was fast, nimble, and equipped with state-of-the-art navigation systems. Their best bet was to outrun them, use the field of asteroid debris to confuse the enemy targeting systems. Without waiting for another reply, Mira hit the intercom. All hands brace for evasive maneuvers. The ship shuddered as the engines surged to full throttle. Mira's heart pounded as they rocketed toward the chaotic labyrinth of asteroid fields. The view outside the window was a dizzying rush of rocks, shifting and colliding, a deadly maze of jagged stone. She watched with tense eyes as the ship weaved in and out, narrowly dodging massive asteroids, their hulking forms threatening to crush them at any moment. Shields down to 45%, Captain, Harrow called from his station. We can't keep this up for long. Mira didn't flinch. I know, she muttered, scanning the field ahead. We're almost there. Hold on. The hegemony fleet wasn't giving up. They followed relentlessly, their ships cutting through the asteroid belt with eerie precision. Mira's fingers gripped the armrest tightly as the Resilient dipped and weaved between the rocks, a desperate dance for survival. For a moment, the tension in her shoulders melted away as the ship shot through an opening, just wide enough to slip through, the hegemony ships unable to follow. They were almost there. Almost free. And then, in the silence that followed, the soft whine of the engines, too loud in the quiet of the command deck, shifted to a concerning whimper. Mira's gaze shot down to the console. No. Not now, Captain, Cale said, his voice low. We've lost main power to the engines. The ship lurched, then drifted. The emergency thrusters fired, but they were too weak. Mira's stomach dropped as the Resilient began to glide, its momentum lost. We've lost control, Mira said, voice tightening. She glanced at the screen, watching as the hegemony fleet, now ominously close, locked on to their position. What the hell happened? Harrow shouted, slamming his fist into his station. We're not going to make it, Mira said quietly, staring at the screen as the enemy's ships lined up. There was no way out. A deep, rumbling voice came through the intercom, breaking the tension. It was Cale. We may have one last shot. We need to activate the emergency jump sequence. Mira's eyes flashed to the coordinates. There was no time left. If they didn't jump now, they would be caught in the hegemony's grasp. She made her decision. Engage the jump drive, she ordered. Her hand pressed the button. There was a brief flash of light, and then, nothing. For a moment, the universe fell away. The silence that followed was deafening. The Resilient had vanished. The jump was successful. But it was far from over. The stillness inside the Resilient was suffocating. Mira sat at the command console, hands gripping the edges, as the ship drifted in the void. The lights above flickered intermittently, casting faint shadows across the control panels. The stars outside were distant and unyielding, a cold reminder of how far they had jumped. How far they'd fallen. Engines are fried, Captain. We're stuck in this quadrant, Harrow said from his station, his voice a thin thread of frustration. The jump was too unstable. It's going to take days to make repairs, if we're lucky. Mira's jaw tightened. The ship had made the emergency jump through sheer instinct, but now, they were stranded in an uncharted part of the galaxy. No reinforcements. No support. Only the vast emptiness around them. Status report, Commander? She asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Cale's face appeared on the screen in front of her, pale and drawn. Our fuel reserves are low, and I've got engineers working around the clock. It's gonna be tight. We can't go anywhere until we're back to full power. Full power? Mira scoffed bitterly. We're running on fumes, Cale. If we don't get off this rock, we're dead. Don't forget the fleet that's still out there, Captain. Cale's voice was steady, but the edge of fear in it was unmistakable. We're not just fighting against our broken ship. We're fighting against time. Mira stared out into the abyss, her eyes narrowing. It was all too clear. The hegemony fleet would eventually find them. They had to. This was the galaxy's cruel reality, the cold, merciless hunt that never stopped. But even as the pressure mounted, Mira's mind flickered to the jump drive systems. The moment they'd entered the unknown space, the jump had sent them careening toward an uncharted planet. A planet that might hold answers, or at least a chance of survival. She turned to Cale. You said we're in an uncharted system? Any sign of life? Any civilization? Scans are inconclusive, Cale replied, his voice hardening. No clear structures or signals. Just a lot of dust and rock. But there's something odd. The readings don't match up. There's energy here, Captain, faint, but enough to make me suspicious. Mira nodded, her mind racing. Suspicious. That was the only word she needed to hear. Then it's our only option. Get a team ready. We need to investigate. I'll lead the landing party. Cale hesitated, then nodded. Aye, Captain. The command deck felt heavier as Mira stood. Every movement felt slow, as if the weight of their predicament was pulling her down. She glanced at the empty seat beside her. Her old friend and first officer, Lieutenant Ral, wasn't there. the cold silence of his absence gnawed at her insides. Ral had been more than just a comrade, he had been family. But that was before the betrayal. Before the Resilient had been ambushed during their last mission. Her breath hitched, but she pushed the memories down. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past, not now. Not when every moment mattered. Minutes later, the landing bay doors slid open with a soft hiss. Mira stood at the threshold, fully geared, her helmet secured. She watched as her team assembled. Harrow, always reliable, stood at the forefront, his grim expression hidden behind his helmet's visor. Then there was Rice, the quiet medic, and Lieutenant Caldera, a weapons expert with a biting wit. Each of them knew their place, but none of them looked reassured. Mira cleared her throat, drawing their attention. Listen up. This is not just about survival. The enemy is out there, and we need answers. The planet we're heading to may hold some. We find shelter, we gather intel, and we make our repairs. There's no room for mistakes. Her words were met with tight nods. Harrow spoke first. What's the plan once we're down there, Captain? You're not thinking of going in blind, are you? No, Mira said. We're going to find out what's on this planet. Something's wrong with this system, and I intend to find out what. If we're lucky, we may even find something that'll help us fix this ship. They filed into the landing craft, the engines humming to life. Mira looked up, her eyes scanning the strange world beyond the cockpit. Through the reinforced glass, she saw nothing but a swirling mass of dust and gray skies. The atmosphere was thick, dense, almost choking, but the scans showed breathable air, just. As the craft descended, the planet's surface grew clearer. Jagged mountains pierced the clouds, surrounded by vast plains of cracked earth. It was a desolate wasteland, like a forgotten world that had been scarred by time. Mira's heart skipped a beat. They touched down with a soft thud, the craft's engines winding down. Mira unstrapped herself from the seat, her boots thudding against the cold metal floor. She glanced at her team. We move out in 5. Stay sharp. The doors opened with a grinding screech, and the team stepped into the harsh, unwelcoming landscape. The wind howled around them, stirring the dust and debris. Mira could feel the tension building, a sense of foreboding that seemed to seep into her bones. We're not alone here, Harrow muttered, scanning the horizon. I can feel it. I'm not surprised, Mira said. Let's make this quick. They moved in formation, weapons ready, eyes darting over the desolate expanse. Their footsteps were the only sound in the eerie silence, each one louder than the last. The energy readings on Mira's scanner flickered, indicating that they were approaching something. And then, as if summoned by their presence, a structure emerged from the dust, a colossal, pyramid-like structure, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the harsh landscape. It was ancient, weathered, but unmistakable. Is that what I think it is? Caldera's voice came through Mira's comms, laced with awe. Mira's eyes narrowed. Let's find out. As they approached the pyramid, the ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate. The closer they got, the stronger the tremors became. Something was alive beneath the surface. And it was watching them. Captain, Rice said, his voice tense. I'm getting strange readings, something's moving underneath. Mira's heart skipped. It wasn't just the planet that was hiding secrets. Stay close, she ordered. Keep your weapons ready. But as they approached the entrance, the structure itself seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Mira felt the air crackle with it. Whatever lay within, it was waiting for them. And they had no choice but to face it. The air inside the pyramid was thick, stagnant with centuries of dust and forgotten echoes. Mira led her team through the narrow, winding corridors, her hand gripping her blaster tightly. The soft hiss of their breath echoed through the dark stone, and every footstep felt too loud, as if they were disturbing a fragile, ancient peace. The walls were etched with symbols, alien and archaic, swirling in patterns that Mira couldn't make sense of. They glowed faintly under the light of their torches, casting eerie shadows on the cold stone. She could feel the weight of the structure pressing down on them, as if the very bones of the pyramid were alive, watching, waiting. This place feels wrong, Harrow muttered, his voice low and strained, almost as if he was speaking to himself. Like it's not just a structure, like it's watching us. Keep your head on straight, Mira snapped. We have a mission. Stay focused. But even as she spoke, a deep unease settled in her chest. The tremors from earlier had only intensified, and now the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with a quiet power, an energy that vibrated through her bones. Whatever this place was, it was ancient. And it was far from abandoned. They rounded a corner, and the corridor opened up into a vast chamber. The walls here were even more intricately carved, depicting scenes of battles, of gods, and of strange creatures, none of them familiar. But what stood out to Mira was the enormous object at the center of the room. A massive, black obelisk, towering and ominous, stood at the heart of the chamber. It was covered in the same symbols as the walls, but they pulsed with a dark, unsettling light. Mira's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, drawn to it. Something about it called to her, something familiar yet terrifying. Captain, do you feel that? Rice asked, his voice trembling. He was the medic, pragmatic and calm, but even he couldn't hide the fear in his tone. Mira nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel it now, too. The energy in the room was thick, oppressive. It wrapped around them like a shroud, a weight pressing down on their very souls. Stay alert, Mira ordered, her eyes fixed on the obelisk. This is it. The source of the readings. Harrow stepped forward, his hand reaching out, but Mira stopped him with a sharp glance. We don't know what this thing is. Be careful. Harrow shot her a glance, but he nodded, stepping back slightly. What is it, Captain? This doesn't feel like a weapon, or a power source. It feels wrong. Mira stared at the obelisk, her mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't like anything she had encountered before. The readings from the scanners were off the charts, energy levels that didn't match anything in the Federation's database. She had no idea what it could be, but it was clear that they had stumbled upon something dangerous. We need to gather more data, Mira said, her voice hard with resolve. We'll take a sample and get out of here. But as she moved toward the obelisk, a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Mira froze. It was an animalistic sound, one that made her skin crawl. She whipped around, her blaster raised. From the shadows something emerged, massive, hulking figures with glowing red eyes, their forms twisted and unnatural. They were tall, too tall, with elongated limbs and jagged spines protruding from their backs. Their faces were a grotesque mockery of the human form, with sharp, razor-like teeth and gaping maws. Get back! Mira shouted, her voice a burst of adrenaline. But the creatures didn't hesitate. They advanced, their movements fluid, predatory. They didn't make a sound as they moved, but their presence was suffocating. The team opened fire, blasters sizzling in the tense air, but the creatures were fast. Too fast. One of them lunged at Harrow, knocking him to the ground. The others closed in, circling, their eyes glinting with hunger. Captain? Harrow shouted, struggling to break free, but the creature's claws dug into his armor, dragging him back. Mira's heart hammered in her chest. She fired a shot, the blast striking the creature in the side, but it barely flinched. These things weren't like anything they had faced before. Fall back! She barked, but her voice was drowned out by the screams of the team. The creatures were relentless, tearing through their lines. Rice went down next, his body writhing in pain as one of the monsters sank its teeth into his leg. Mira's pulse raced, her mind working on overdrive. There was no way out. No way to fight back. They were too strong, too fast. And yet, she couldn't leave her crew behind. Not now. She ran toward Harrow, ignoring the chaos around her. Her blaster fired again and again, but each shot seemed to do little more than slow the creatures down. She reached Harrow, yanking him to his feet, pulling him away from the creature's claws. Move! She screamed, dragging him back toward the entrance. But as she turned to lead him out, the ground shook violently. A deafening roar filled the chamber, and the obelisk in the center of the room began to pulse with a violent energy, its dark glow intensifying. The air grew hotter, heavier. The very walls seemed to close in on them. "We've stirred something." Kale's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, you need to get out of there, now!" The creatures shrieked in unison, their twisted mouths opening wide. Mira's blood ran cold as she realized the full extent of their rage. They weren't just defending the pyramid. They were waking up. She had to make a choice. Fight or flee. "Go!" she ordered, shoving Harrow toward the exit. "Get to the ship!" But as they ran, the ground beneath them split open, and Mira knew the real nightmare was just beginning. The cavernous roar echoed in Mira's ears as she and her crew scrambled through the now warping corridors of the pyramid. The walls themselves seemed to be alive, shifting, contracting, pulsing with the same malignant energy that had sprung from the obelisk. Sweat beaded on Mira's forehead, the pressure of their situation closing in on her chest with every labored breath. "Captain? They're everywhere!" Harrow's voice broke through the static of her comms, his panic palpable. She could hear the rapid gunfire and the distant screeches of the creatures behind them. "We're pinned down in the tunnel! We won't make it back to the landing bay!" Mira's heart hammered, her thoughts racing. They had come so close to finding a way off this forsaken planet. But now, their escape felt like a cruel joke. They were trapped, the creatures relentless, and the ship miles away. The reality of the situation pressed heavily on her shoulders, and for a moment she wanted to stop running, to turn and face the nightmare behind her. But the team was counting on her, and failure was not an option. "Keep moving!" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Don't stop! We push forward! We get back to the ship!" But even as she spoke, the ground trembled again, harder this time. The pyramid was buckling under the strain of the obelisk's power, its core reacting violently to the disturbance caused by the creatures. The energy crackled around them, a deadly current that was tearing the ancient structure apart. Suddenly, the walls on either side of them exploded in a shower of stone and dust, and Mira barely had time to react before a massive creature lunged forward, its jaws snapping inches from her face. She ducked, rolling across the floor and firing a quick burst from her blaster. The shot struck the creature's shoulder, but it didn't stop. It only shrieked louder, its eyes filled with rage. "Captain?" Rice shouted from behind her, pulling Mira to her feet. "We're losing them! We have to go!" They ran, pushing past the fallen debris, hearing the screams of their comrades in the distance. Mira's pulse surged as her mind went blank for a moment, focusing only on survival. They had to get to the ship. The Resilient was their only chance. As they neared the landing bay, the sky above them seemed to darken, the atmosphere thickening with unnatural pressure. Mira could barely see through the haze as they sprinted through the open doors of the bay, the ship's silhouette looming in the distance. But they weren't alone. The creatures were closing in, and now there were more of them. Dozens. Hundreds. "Get to the Resilient!" Mira yelled, her voice hoarse. "Go now!" Harrow was already ahead of them, his pulse quickening as he reached the ship's entry. Mira's eyes flicked back, scanning the chaos. She saw a massive figure charging toward her, its claws scraping against the metal floor, its twisted mouth gaping in anticipation. "Not today!" Mira spun around, her hand quick to activate the ship's defensive systems. "I'm covering you! Get inside!" She didn't wait for a response. Her blaster tore through the air, striking the creature's chest. It staggered back, its screech echoing in the cavern, but it was still alive. The moment stretched, Mira's finger tightening on the trigger once again. But just as the creature lunged at her, something unexpected happened. The obelisk's pulse flared violently. The ship's systems blared a warning as the pyramid seemed to shudder, as if the planet itself had awakened. Mira stumbled back, the blaster slipping from her grip as an overwhelming wave of energy surged through the air. For a split second, everything went dark. She fell to her knees, gasping for breath, the force of the blast rattling her entire body. When the lights flickered back on, everything was different. The pyramid had collapsed in on itself, the creatures now motionless, their forms crumpled and lifeless. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had raged moments ago. Mira's head swam as she forced herself to stand, her legs unsteady. She saw Cale at the foot of the ramp, his face pale, his expression filled with disbelief. "What just happened?" Harrow's voice was a low growl, his hands shaking. "What was that? Some kind of energy pulse?" Mira looked around at her team, her mind struggling to process the events. The pyramid was gone, reduced to rubble, the energy dissipating into the air. The creatures were no more, their twisted bodies now lying inert on the floor. There was no sound, no movement, just the cold aftermath of whatever force had been unleashed. "I think we just triggered something," Mira said, her voice thick with realization. "Something ancient. And it's gone now." "Gone?" Cale echoed, his brow furrowing. "But the obelisk, wasn't it a power source?" Mira nodded slowly, her mind working through the possibilities. The obelisk, whatever it was, had been more than just a relic. It had been a key, something that had controlled the creatures, the very energy of the planet. And when they disturbed it, it had reacted, unleashing a pulse that had wiped them out. "But what does this mean for us?" Harrow asked. "Are we safe?" Mira didn't know how to answer that. The fight wasn't over, not yet. They'd made it off the planet, but at what cost? The Resilient was still damaged, and the Hegemony fleet was still out there. They had escaped the immediate danger, but they were not free. Not yet. "We're not out of the woods," Mira said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her chest. "We need to repair the ship, regroup, and prepare for what's coming. But for now, we've survived." She turned to face the horizon, the stars stretching out before her, endless and unforgiving. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity wasn't done yet. They were just getting started. "Get the ship ready for takeoff," Mira ordered, her eyes hardening. "We leave now. We have a long road ahead." And as the Resilient ascended into the blackness of space, Mira couldn't help but wonder what lay beyond the stars. What challenges awaited them, what enemies they would face, what alliances they might form. The galaxy was vast, and humanity, against all odds, was determined to carve out a place for itself. They would not go quietly into the night. This was just the beginning.